Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Lindsay.
I'm Ron.
And we are here to talk about Street Trash, starring Mike Lackey, R.L. Ryan, Vic Noto, and Jane Arakawa. Written and produced by Roy How do you say that? Frumkes? Frumkes. Written and produced by Roy Frumkes, directed by J. Michael Muro, released in 1987. This one is considered a cult classic among independent horror movies and the specific subgenre of melt movies. Now, this was my first time ever seeing this, but Ron, when I brought it up after a quick Google search of mine and said, this movie looks interesting, it sounded like you had seen it before. So what is your history with this?
Yes, I have seen this movie before. I've seen it several times. It has a pretty notorious VHS cover that I rented from the Hollywood Video because, yes, this was on a major, back when video stores were a thing, this was out there where you could rent it from a major video place. And also, before watching it for recording, I'd also seen it for when it was included on the last drive-in with Joe Bob Briggs. And that was a great episode because Joe Bob Briggs has been in New York for, since the 80s. And this movie was shot in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, in an actual junkyard, in an area where probably you would be paying like $2,500 rent for one of these apartments that, that catch fire and the bums are running through and the naked people run down the stairs and all that stuff in this movie. So... all that to say, New York is a land of contrasts.
Just a little bit of everything. And we really get to see.
Did you have any background with this movie, Lindsay? Or did you just like...
No, I don't even remember what movie we were talking about that we were trying to find a match for or some other movie to kind of talk about with it. But I Googled, I basically looked at the people also watched section, and Street Trash was one of the first ones that came up, and I had never heard of it before. And here we are. I sent it across our little text chain, and that was that. I mean, it looked like it was right in kind of the realm of things we like to review, so I figured it'd be an all right choice.
Yeah, it was one of the more notorious entries in the melt movie genre. Are you familiar at all with this genre of film?
So I had a note to ask you about that. I actually have a whole list of movies considered to be in the melt movie genre. And then I tried to figure out, well, how is melt movie defined exactly? Is it one of these, I know it when I see it, this is definitely a melt movie. Without knowing that that was a subgenre, I think I could have figured that one out. But how would you define melt movie?
To me, a melt movie is any movie where someone melts into a puddle of terrible goops.
Okay.
So
that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Usually it's they're like body horror adjacent, but it's a very specific type of body horror to me. So like, I don't know what's on your list, but I can tell you The Blob, the 1988 remake of The Blob, has a dude that melts pretty good. The Lucio Fulci movie The Beyond has some melty people in it. The Stuff, which came out a couple years before this movie, is one of the more notorious melt movies because these people eat this weird mystery treat and they turn into like slime glop goop monsters. There's a flick from the early 90s called Body Melt that's pretty notorious.
Well, that sounds like a straightforward melt movie. Yeah, this list, and I got it on IMDb, but this list has a lot of movies. I think they're reaching for some of them. Gremlins is on there. There's some melty scenes
Yeah, I
in
could
that
see
movie.
Gremlins, but it's not, to me, if it's not a person who melts, it doesn't really count.
Yeah, fair.
And
Cabin in the Woods? Would you consider that a melt movie?
I would not.
I
To,
wouldn't either.
to me, if it came out after like 1994 or so, it can't be a real melt movie because, like, I feel like the genre kind of peaked with the insane, awful, crazy Brian Usna movie Society,
Yes. Yeah.
and kind of faded out after there. Except for the scene in RoboCop where Emil gets doused with the toxic waste, and then as he's melting, he staggers into the street and gets hit by the runaway police van and explodes.
I
That's a pretty
mean,
good.
Wizard of Oz has a melt scene.
The very first melt movie,
Mhm.
except for probably the Incredible Melting Man, but um, that's a pretty notorious. That's a pretty interesting like take on what the first melt movie would be, because like that movie would be the first of a lot of different subgenres of horror.
Yeah. I never really thought of The Wizard of Oz as a horror movie, but it's kind of terrifying.
Well, it's like the famous plot summary that would appear in the newspaper every so often. A young girl travels to a strange land and kills the first person she meets. Then she teams up with four strangers and plans to kill again.
Fairly accurate with a bunch of little people. You know what part of Wizard totally off topic. What part of Wizard of Oz always creeped me out is there's a line when she's in the Emerald City and she asks, "Can you even dye my eyes to match my gown?" And I was like, "How do you dye eyes?" I always pictured needles going into her
Oh
eyeballs
yeah.
to color them.
Mm.
Ugh, gross.
Talk about some
Anyway,
body horror right there. That
I
would be
know,
awful.
but we digress. Wizard of Oz spinoff horror movie. Let's
Yeah.
do it.
Speaking of Lucio Fulci movies, if you're going to talk about people getting stabbed in the eyeball, that'd be the guy who would go for that. But you could say, like, even people would say like the scene from Creep Show, The Lonely Death of Jordy Verrill, where Stephen King becomes a moss monster. Some people would consider that like a melt movie or a melt short story. The scene in Mandy where they would drink the weird juice and they get the superpowers, but they kind of sound like slime monsters as they stomp around. Um,
Yeah.
Planet Terror, where all the Quentin Tarantino takes his mask off and he starts to dissolve from whatever weird chemical the military guys were exposed to. Um, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Any of those could possibly count, but like to me, like if we're not talking society or street trash or the stuff, we're not talking like an authentic melt movie. It's just a movie inspired by a melt movie.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the movies on this list, like I said, it's kind of a reach. I don't think I'd consider it, but this one, Street Trash, definitely a melt movie. I had a brief moment of panic, Ron, right before we started this podcast, because I was looking at Street Trash IMDb page and was on by accident the Street Trash 2024 IMDb page, which I did not know was a thing. And I was looking at the pictures and I said, none of these pictures were in the movie that I watched.
I did not I did not know that they had made that until we watched this one.
Yeah, so I know that now as of probably 10 minutes ago. I got back onto the correct original Street Trash 1987 page, and my anxiety was soothed. But yeah, there's a Street Trash 2024.
It's pretty weird to say that your anxiety was soothed by watching a bunch of homeless people get dissolved into paste.
Do you know? It's it was you know why? It's because the pasty, I don't know, whatever they melted into, it kind of reminded me of, like, gack or ooze. Do you remember that
Ooh,
stuff? Like
I
the
do.
Nickelodeon brand gack ooze stuff that you could get at the store. I loved that. We played with that stuff all the time.
There was gack, which made the squishing sound when you squeezed it, and there was the
Yeah.
ooze, which kind of dripped. My
Yeah.
daughter currently is obsessed with slime and making
Mhm.
slime and playing with
Oh, with, like,
slime.
the glue and the glitter and all that stuff. Is that how
Yeah,
you make it? Yeah.
that's it. And
Yeah.
so like it's pretty wild to see that, these kind of things just periodically come back to be a thing people talk about.
Well,
But
I don't know, did you ever see the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie with Ivan Ooze circa 1995? I was getting Ivan
it,
Ooze vibes from this.
I could definitely see some avenues in this. But it's funny to think about this insane movie that if they had permits to do any of these things, I would be extremely surprised.
I didn't even think about that.
I just believe that Michael Murrow knew a guy who owned the junkyard, and that was like, because like this is just a longer version of a student film he made, and it's
Yeah,
wild
I
to
did
think
see
about.
that.
Like, well, it's wild to think about because I went to his IMDb page expecting him to have done one movie and then disappeared.
Mhm.
He is the director of photography for Horizon and American Saga and like Longmire, and like he's a legit, like he directed, like 10 episodes of that SEAL Team TV series that was on a couple years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah, he is like a legit director, and like especially like a cinematographer and a camera operator. So like he's a legit dude, and for all the things you could say about how insane this movie is, it's surprisingly well made.
It is, and, I mean, everyone has to start somewhere. I would cringe at I mean, I have. I think my mom's kept videos of every play I was ever in when I was a kid. I don't wanna watch that, but I'm sure she enjoys it. Everyone's gotta start somewhere. It's cool that he made such a name for himself. I looked at a lot of the actors, they did not. This was pretty much where they stopped, a lot of them, but I don't know. It was there was something I don't know. I couldn't stop watching it. It was a beautiful train wreck of a movie in the best way. Before we get too far into it, Ron, can you give us a quick plot summary?
Well, I can certainly try. Because this movie has a lot of crazy things that happen. But before I start talking about the crazy things that happened in the movie, I'd like to talk a little bit about my life. When I was in college, I had a weird fascination with what was then called, and we're going to use this term a lot, so I apologize if we offend anyone, bum wines. Now
Okay.
there were whole websites about them. There's a whole culture around them. Lindsay, are you familiar at all with bum wine?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but if you're not, those are the high ABV fortified wines like
Think Irish Rose.
Mad Dog 2020, Wild Irish Rose. Some guys I
Mhm.
knew in a punk band had a great song called Wild Irish Rose, which is about him cutting school when he was like 15 and sharing a bottle of Wild Irish Rose in an alley with a actual homeless person.
They were $3 a bottle. You could not beat it. The
Yeah,
cheapest bottle of wine on the shelf.
Thunderbird, Night Train, all that kind of stuff. So I tried pretty much all of those in various points of my life, uh, to various levels of enjoyment. I did kind of like Wild Irish Rose, I have to say.
It
Night
tastes
Train,
nothing like wine. If anyone out there is interested,
yeah,
set your
and
expectations real low.
And I like the fact that kids these days are drinking Mad Dog for like TikTok challenges. So it's like you people just don't know what you're getting into. But thankfully, one of the bum wines I never got a chance to try was Tenafly or Tenafly Viper. Lindsay, you're from New Jersey. How is that pronounced?
I have no idea. I'm a Jersey transplant, so
Oh,
let's go with I don't know, however you want to say it.
we'll just call it Viper
Yeah, Viper's good.
I think Tenafly or Tenafly, that's a city in New Jersey, which I think why it has that name. Kind of
Tenafly,
like how
maybe.
canonically Tromaville is in New Jersey. Um, but yeah, thankfully I never tried the Viper for reasons that we're going to go into right about now. Fred, who looks like Torgo from Manos, the Hands of Fate, is just trying to get his drink on. But every time he gets his hand on a $1 bottle of something from the liquor store, in this case, it's Viper, which the proprietor of said liquor store found hidden behind a false wall 60 years ago. It somehow gets taken by someone else. He steals a couple bucks, and after a long chase through the street, he's jumped by a fellow bum who takes and drinks the Viper, then melts explosively into a nearby disused toilet. And not in the way that you would expect him to explode into a toilet. He literally melted into a pile of goo until his distorted monster face gargle yells out of the potty. Yeesh. It's not every day that homeless people are start melting on the street, and as more and more bums get their hands on Viper and turn into various shades and textures and flavors of ooze, it catches the attention of one of the local police officers, Bill. Now, this attention only gets worse after Bronson, the king of some sort of underground junkyard bum society, brutally murders a passing idiot on a street corner by smashing him through the window of his own car. So, meanwhile, the bums at the junkyard, like Fred and his brother Kevin, are just trying to get something to eat, something to drink, someone to screw. Kevin has his sights set on the lovely Wendy, who works for the junkyard owner, Mr. Schneezer, when she's not giving food out to help the kids or being sexually harassed by her boss. She's a pretty cool person. The cop has his murder to solve, so he shakes down one of the members of the community for information, and that bum gives up that Bronson lives in the junkyard with all the other bums. Meanwhile, that same night, Fred takes a drunk girl home from the restaurant of a mob goon named Nick. Not the Nick from Filmstrip, it's a different Nick. As far as I know, Filmstrip Nick is not mobbed up, but allegedly. Fred has sex with her, but the fornication ferocity attracts the attention of the other bums. So after Fred gets his, they drag the naked woman out of Fred's underground car cave thing and proceed to apparently get theirs off screen. So the next morning, a mafioso's Gumar is found dead by the river, and Schneezer reports it to the police. Although apparently it's heavily implied that he has sex with the dead body before he calls the cops, which is something. Yeah, folks, it's that kind of movie. And now we follow necrophilia with a guy getting peed on, and then the guy who got peed on angrily ripping the ding dong off of the peeing guy like Castle Freak in the memory of Stuart Wellington from the Flophouse podcast. So after he cuts the guy's schwanz off, that kicks off a spirited game of penis football that ends up with the severed member flying through the air, getting punted, getting kicked and caught. And then that ends with the bum in question catching his own severed wang and hitching the ride on the back of a passing school bus, not dramatic at all, back to the city, apparently, presumably to get it sewn back on in Manhattan rather than like eaten by dogs in Brooklyn. So, meanwhile, after a trip to the police station, Nick the mobster identifies his dead girlfriend and decides to take matters in his own hand to avenge her murder by taking it out on the local bums. Bill also decides to take matters into his own hands to both A, stop Nick, and B, solve the mystery of the occasionally melting hobos. Fred has already learned the secret as he sees a guy drink the Tenafly Viper and melt it to a pile of slop right in front of him. Nick sends a hitman from the mob after Fred, but Fred is saved from the hitman by Bill, who then goes into the junkyard to arrest Bronson. The two have a prolonged they live fight before Bronson stabs Bill in the back, killing him. Fred, Kevin, and Wendy all engage in flight from an enraged Bronson, who is fully off of his Vietnam era nut by this point. Before Kevin saves his brother from certain death by killing Bronson, by exploding him with an air tank, just like in Jaws. Fred, Kevin, and Wendy presumably live happily ever after as credits roll. Except we're not quite done. As the credits roll on one side, Nick the mobster is making threats to the door guy from his restaurant who watched Fred take off with his drunk girlfriend. But before he can kill the door guy, Nick makes a fatal mistake. He drinks the door guy's bottle of Viper and, off screen, turns into a pile of monster goop. Now that we've tied up that last loose end or severed that last loose penis, credits can officially roll.
That last scene conversation with the credits might have been one of my favorites. It
Where
was
where the
just
door
so
guy
silly.
and the door guy apparently starts giving orders to the mobsters like he's the one who killed Nick, rather
Like,
than just you got lucky.
I just love when he was like, "No, I mean, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean any of it. Your stuff's good. I like your duck." And the night that your girlfriend got raped and beat, I had a piece. It was really good. And he's just like very nonchalantly
Yeah, trying to make
peppering
your
in all the horrors that happened, but complimenting his food. So funny.
yeah, that was a really, really hilarious sequence. And let's give a shout out to Mike Lackey, the guy who plays Fred. Not only did he play Fred, he was also the one of the special effects people on the movie and he's the one who designed the penis football.
Really?
And apparently they had 3 different sizes of penis football, each of which was named a different thing. They were called the Pecker, the Poker, and the Packer. The Packer being the big one that they used that they throw around like a football. So
they really appeared to enjoy that. I guess that scene got cut from the UK version of this film and then added back in on DVD in like 2021 or something. But I didn't I don't I think I don't know, it's just hard to imagine this movie being released anywhere, let alone like Europe. But
well, not only was it released, they had a theatrical premiere where the garbage truck that was used in the movie was what they used to bring the cast members into the premiere. So somebody threw some money at this thing at some point.
I mean, well, we already talked about it. It's such a weird, surprisingly well done movie. I don't even really know where to start. My first leap to like for comparison was Troll 2 because it's such a weird, goopy cult classic.
Yeah, that's perfectly fair.
Um, but and I like the whole time I was watching this movie, all I kept asking myself was, do I like this better? Or do I like Troll 2 better? I
Well,
think I'll have to watch this a second time to decide, but
the thing about this movie is, like, it's much more competently made and acted versus Troll
yeah.
2. So Troll 2 has the charm of being like, he's eating them, and now she's gonna eat me. Ah, that
Yeah.
famous
Yeah.
sequence. And this one like has some really committed extras doing some crazy business at all times.
Yeah.
Like,
Everyone really feels like they commit to whatever role they're playing. I mean, Bronson really felt those nightmares, visions, or whatever. And who's the Lynette? That was the name, right? Of his girlfriend
yes.
person thing that kept wanting him to kiss her on the mouth. Um, She was really good too. It was, I mean, she committed. She committed to that role
Well,
for
and it's
sure.
funny because Bronson Vignato was actually like a Vietnam veteran who was honorably discharged, and like he was a New York native, and he's one of the few actors in this movie that's had a pretty decent career. He's had 50 roles or been credited in 50 different roles, playing a lot of smaller things, but
Mhm.
he was in the Daredevil TV series that Netflix did. Um, he's
Yeah.
on, he did like, music videos and stuff. So he's been around and like done some things.
He's
Um,
working.
yeah. And
Yep.
good for him.
Yeah. No, seriously. It I think I was just more surprised than anything else through the whole movie. And the body horror, the first melt scene where I don't know what I was expecting. I think perhaps I kind of went into this movie knowing very little outside of what you had mentioned, which was also very little. But for some reason in my head, I thought, okay, they drink this liquor and then they turn into zombies. I didn't realize that they just fully melted. So the first melt scene on the toilet was really delightful. I was truly surprised by what was happening. I knew it had to do with the liquor just based on what I'd read, but I had read very little about it, so it was cool. I liked it.
Yeah, that guy melting into a puddle of goo can weirdly be described as delightful. You're right.
I don't
It's
know.
so
It's really satisfying to
it's
watch
so
it.
satisfying and it's so ridiculous and it's so like horrifying but also like hilarious at the same time.
Yeah. I had so many feelings through this whole movie, none of them bad, but I had to I don't know, they just had it felt like everyone on this movie had so much fun on this movie, and everyone involved,
Like
especially
I
the
don't
effects
know
people.
like I don't know how you didn't have fun making this movie because you just get to
Yeah.
be on 100 as often as possible. Like, and the only sponsor apparently that they had was a snack cake company, and they would just give them a box. They would just like bring boxes of snack cakes to the set every week, and by the time they finished shooting the movie, they were so sick of the snack cakes they actually blew a bunch of them up when they made the fat guy explode.
Oh my gosh. That was
So
I appreciated that too because it wasn't just everybody melted exactly the same way. The melting was a little bit different. They were either a different color or consistency goop or gack.
yeah,
Or they exploded or there's
some
so
were
many different options.
some were gack, some were slime, some were
Yeah.
goop, some were the I don't know green goo from You Can't Do That on Television.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite. Um, the guy who climbs up on the fire escape to drink his ill-gotten viper
Uh-huh.
and starts presumably vomiting or retching bits of goo out, and then they hit the passing businessman on the face, and the acid melts his face off.
Yep. That was a good one.
Speaking of melted faces, that is the I believe that's the director who is making his Hitchcock like cameo
Really?
as guy who gets his face. It's either him or the writer, but it's one of those guys getting their Hitchcock cameo in as the face barf, face
Face
barf blinded
barf.
businessman.
So the rule is if it drops on you while they're melting, then you too will melt. Can you touch it after they've exploded or melted?
I don't think so, because you see later on when the guy drinks the Viper and melts a little bit of it gets on Fred. He like shakes it off his foot real quick, so because it apparently like stepping in it makes you burn.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't want to overthink it too much because I feel like this isn't a a film that requires a ton of overthinking. But
Yeah, I
yeah, I couldn't
believe.
figure that out.
Yeah, I believe the burn faced man is Roy Frumkes, who is best known to me as the dude who wrote the first three Substitute movies. So
Oh,
yeah, if you ever want to see Tom Berenger and or Treat Williams, uh,
I love his character name is Melted Businessman.
yeah, it's perfectly accurate. Yeah. So this movie has a lot of stuff happening, and there's a lot of characters. You know, you've got uh, various homeless people. Bronson, we talked about Fred and Kevin and Wendy, Mr. What's his name? Schneeve. I keep want to call him Mr. Schneebly, but that's
Schneiser, Mr.
Mr.
Schneiser,
Schneiser. Mr.
Frank
Schneebly is
Schneiser. Oh, he was
School of Rock.
so dirty and creepy and sweaty and icky.
He was both like extremely clean looking, but also like extremely filthy looking at the same time.
Yes. It depended on the scene. So the scene where he was I don't know, on top of Wendy in the office, like his shirt was so sweaty and dirty and gross.
Mm-hmm.
He almost looked cleaner after his little like necrophilia incident.
Yeah, maybe he like cleaned up with a little rubbing alcohol on a
Yeah, I don't
washcloth after that.
Gross. I went back because I thought I missed something, or I did, but he was walking away and I was like, did what just happen? Did I just see what I think I just saw? So I, went back like 30 seconds and you just see him zipping up his pants, getting off of the dead woman. And I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. All right. We're just going to go there.
Yeah,
Cool.
and then when Bill the cop is like, yeah, the third from the last one
Yeah.
had
Had
syphilis.
syphilis.
Like, number one, how do you even determine that? Number two, he immediately starts like scratching himself, which was very funny.
Yep.
Uh,
Ugh,
so
this
man,
guy.
what a it's a movie that's grotesque even before we start melting people in various ways. But
Yeah.
we've talked some about the melts and the practical effects and how good those are. But this movie has such like a dark strain of humor running through it
Yeah.
that makes it feel like they were like, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna make it repulsive, and we're gonna make it yucky, and we're gonna make it yucky and repulsive in every way we can think of. So y'all just throw your good taste right out the window. But they don't do it in like an overbearing, like, you know, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is a movie that's hard to watch, mostly because Michael Rooker's an amazing actor and the whole movie itself looks kind of grimy and gross and disgusting. But it has a little humor in it, but like street trash is always going to stop and make some kind of joke.
Yeah.
It may not be a joke that lands. It may not be a joke that you should make today. It may not be a joke you should have made in 1987, but they're going to do it. And it's probably going to like lighten the mood a little bit.
Yeah. It all just felt very unapologetic for things that probably especially now, but I would say, yeah, probably even in 1987, they would have been expected to apologize for in some capacity, but I don't know. I I'm still just I'm still just really I'm gonna be thinking about this movie way more than I thought I would after the fact. It was so unexpected. Um, so yeah, just
Well,
trying to
just
form thoughts on the fly.
just think tonally how quickly this movie shifts gears
Yeah.
from the scene where Fred has the woman in his weird car cave and has sex with her, and she's clearly not satisfied with that. And Fred is like,
Yeah.
"Forget you, baby. I already got mine. I'm going to sleep." And then as she's like trying to badger him to wakefulness, it takes a really hard right turn into horror where all these
Yeah.
hands come out of nowhere and drag her screaming into the darkness in a scene that really looks like um it looks like the movie theater scene where the demons first show up in the movie Demons, if you've ever seen that,
Mhm.
and they
And
like
you know
rip
what
out of
they're
the
gonna
screen.
do.
Yeah.
Like, they don't that is I think that's the thing. They don't have to explicitly come out and say what's happening. The audience is given some credit here in the writing. Like, we know what's gonna happen, and then we see the results of what happened, you know, minutes later. So, I think that somehow makes it more palatable, and it's easier to transition from like this horrific thing that happened to the next joke or the next melting scene.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because like these are the same people we were just laughing at a few minutes ago
Yeah.
because they're like the wisecracking peanut gallery while Bronson is there yelling at Wynette or whatever. It's the same
Mhm.
dudes. And then that all of a sudden they take a hard right turn into this terrifying monster territory. And then a few scenes later, they're like playing catch with a severed wang doodle.
Yeah. Which the reaction when the Wang Doodle gets Wang Doodled, I feel like he should have reacted a little sooner. He just looked really confused when his member was being dismembered. He was like, "Wait a second," and then when he pulled out of the hole that he was peeing in and he looked down, that's when he screamed.
Well, apparently, maybe it's like a thing where you don't know you've broken your leg until you look down and you see your foot's pointing in the wrong direction or whatever. And then it's like,
True.
oh, that hurts a lot now.
Yeah.
Maybe he just instantly went into shock. Maybe
He
he's
could
on
have been
sick.
on meth or something.
I would imagine he's on a lot of different substances.
Yeah.
Probably not meth because I don't think meth was a big thing back then, but like definitely on some
Whatever
crack
the
or something.
1987 equivalent would
Angel
have been,
dust,
yeah. Yeah.
crack, whatever he could find, poppers, you know, whippets. I don't know,
Melters.
man.
I don't know.
No, melting it. If he'd had the Viper, they wouldn't have had to rip it off. They were just waiting for
No.
it to melt off.
Ugh.
But
They
man,
really had themselves a good old time. He got it
it
back.
yeah, he got it back and he got a free ride to apparently the nearest hospital. I guess. I hope so for his sake. But it's weird because it's played for laughs and it's like bloodless
Yeah.
rather than in a lot of movies where you'd have like, gushing blood and the guy dies immediately or whatever. Like if it was an Eli Roth movie. I'm thinking of the specific scene in Hostel. Um,
Oh,
or
I
maybe
remember that
Maybe
movie.
Hostel 2. Either
Yeah.
way, it doesn't matter. Um, what matters is it's played for laughs, and everything is played for laughs until it's not.
Mhm.
And the few scenes, like the first couple of melts, are pretty horrific. There's a couple of melts in there that are played for jokes. Uh, there's the lead up to the gang rape scene, followed by the comedy necrophilia scene, which comedy necrophilia scene is not a phrase I thought would
I
be
know.
said on this podcast.
How how do you make that funny? And they managed to find just the weirdest humor in it, and it worked. And this is why my brain is just finding it so difficult. I have found it so difficult to wrap my head around that this movie should in no way work as well as it does, but for some reason it does. And I think they just commit. That's the only thing. They really commit.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why this movie has become like such a cult classic over the years?
It must, right? Because think of the, and again, I'm going to bring Troll 2 back up. The actors are not good. They'll admit that. The writing is weird. The direction we know was also not great for the actors, or according to the actors. Um, but they were all so committed, like they understood their assignment and they just went for it. And somehow that comes through, and it's just such a fun, weird movie. And this is the same, but it's just a little bit better at everything. But everyone still has the same level of commitment that I think everybody involved in Troll 2 had. It just came out better, in my opinion. I think. I still don't know how I feel about it. We'll get to that by the end.
I feel like you'd almost have to say this turned out better, just because, like, I don't know, because some of these people went on to have a career afterwards.
That's true.
So clearly
Yeah.
they found some kind of talent in there.
Yeah.
The special effects team deserves all the praise you could possibly heap on them, because, like we've talked about, no two melts are the same, but they all look amazing
They
at the same
really
time.
do. Yeah, they did not, all of the practical effects felt like they were each cared for in their own perfect little individual bubble. Like it didn't really feel to me, and maybe you feel differently. It felt to me like every single, explosion, or when I say explosion, I mean like body explosion or melting, whatever. It felt like each one was very, very well thought out. Or maybe it wasn't well thought out, but they were like, oh, this would look really cool. Let's do it.
And I feel like that is just evidence for the fact that it is well thought out, because they're like, we know what we want to do. Let's figure out
Yeah.
how to do it. And they did that.
Yeah.
And that's there's something to be said for that. And doing it like in a very cheap location under where you're literally shooting outdoors. Like,
Hmm.
you've got, all these people working together on the makeup and the special effects. And it all comes together in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
And it's clear that a lot of people put like a lot of Mike Lackey and the other person involved in the makeup, Jennifer Aspinall, who is one of the people who did the makeup and stuff for Westworld, which is, I don't know if you watched any of Westworld, the TV series on
Yeah.
HBO,
I think the first 2 seasons.
but it looks incredible. So like clearly, people with real skill worked on this movie and were like, you know what? It's weird. It's a piece of crap. We're gonna make it the best weird piece of crap that we can do. And probably somewhere in the makeup department there is a weird piece of crap that they made for some scene that got cut, because the only thing this movie doesn't have is like active pooping.
There are so many fart and poop references, though, and jokes. Like at the very beginning, there was a lot of farting at the beginning of this movie. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah,
A lot
that's
of
true.
flatulence.
And then
I'm
there's
surprised there wasn't poop.
there's the one guy talking about how he's backed up.
Yeah. Well, and then he melts on the toilet.
Yeah, because he drinks the Viper, so maybe
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah. I
loosens
guess.
everything up.
Yeah. It really loosened everything up. Yuck.
But man, what a also weirdly enough, the guy who played Schneezer in this, before we go any further, was in a bunch of trauma movies. So he is our connection between this independent Slime Lapola movie and like Toxic Avenger. because
Yeah.
he's in Toxic Avenger and Class of Nukem High, and then he's in Street Trash, and then like he dies in like 1991. But
Yeah.
he really made his mark in a very short time.
Yeah. He was great at just being that character. Good old Frank Schneiser. I didn't because that was the other thing. Who Wendy. Uh she clearly wasn't afraid of him. Like she really it felt like she was in control most of the time. So it was really weird to figure out their relationship in the very, few scenes that they had together. But like Frank was a weird, gross, creepy dude, but he wasn't scary. Does that
Right.
make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense because he's not ever perceived as being like a physical threat to anyone.
Right.
Even when he's like on top of
On
Wendy,
top of her. Yeah. The
it's
scariest part was when she thought he died on top of her. And
yeah,
then
which I can't figure out if what that was, why he abruptly passed out or whatever. Or uh, and honestly, I don't want to think too deeply on it because any answers I could provide are repulsive at best and horrifying at worst. Uh, but yeah, it's weird because the only person who ever feels like a physical threat to anyone is Bronson,
Yeah.
even more so than like Nick the Gangster or Bill the Cop, who
Mhm.
Bill the Cop is probably also a physical threat, but like Bronson is like a threat. And Bronson is the one who's played most scary and least for laughs.
Yeah. And I mean, they touch on his very real I would I would, probably call it PTSD. We see like these nightmares that he has and we get to see his very real mental struggles and maybe some of the reason why he's as scary as he is. But then we also get to see him just murder a random, you know, nerdy business guy.
Yeah, it's interesting because like his Vietnam flashbacks are one of the few things that aren't played for a laugh,
Mhm.
and his mental illness is one of the few things that doesn't, at least from having watched it a few times recently, it doesn't seem like that's played for as a joke. It's like that's the one thing they decided to take seriously,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that's like
Well, I mean, I feel like this is 1987, so Vietnam wasn't I mean, it was still very fresh for a lot of people. So
mhm.
I don't I don't know if they could have gotten away with playing any part of that for laughs, but it worked that they didn't. I mean, like you said, Bronson was a very real, not fun character. Well, he was the real scary character in the whole thing.
Yeah,
And
and
everyone
even
in the movie was scared of him. Like all of the other characters were legitimately afraid of Bronson.
yeah,
It
and
felt like.
even when funny things are happening around him, he doesn't seem to be part of the fun. You
Yeah.
know, he doesn't participate in the penis football. Um,
No. But he did provide the football.
that's true. So maybe he's like,
He's a giver.
yeah, and he, yeah, yeah. That's a good way to put it. So he's like the have fun, that's an order guy from Starship Troopers,
Yeah.
uh, Sergeant Rascat. I don't remember if he was a sergeant or a lieutenant. I think he might be a lieutenant. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, he provides the instrument of fun and tells them all to have fun.
Yeah.
And like him and Wynette seem to be the most serious two people in the movie, or the most serious two characters, I guess,
Yeah.
because it's like between the two of them, there's like a Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf thing happening, and it's very they're like their own little weird movie with all the rest of this weirdness taking place around it. Just like how Fred and Kevin and Wendy are kind of in their own little movie for a while, and their friend who wears the gas mask who goes and steals
Yes.
all of the chicken.
He's that was one of my favorite random needle drops. I don't know what song it was, but the music that was playing in the grocery store when he was in there stealing chicken was very jazzy and bubbly and upbeat. It was I wish I knew what it was. I didn't look it up, but I wrote it down to mention because there were a few spots here where the music was really, I feel like, kind of played its own special little character, and that was one of them. He was fun though. Did we talk about who was the restaurant owner, the guy who thought he was a gangster or
Oh, Nick, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He He was funny. The doorman was really funny. There was one line that cracked me up when he was in there like trying to avenge his dead Gumar, as he put it. And they called him the Don of douchebags. And I was like, that is hilarious. All you Italian guys, you always think you're in a fucking mob, you're a gangster. What's this guy? The Don of douchebags is what he is. I was like, that's my favorite line in the whole movie.
which
That's the
was
one.
which was really funny. That whole interaction, which we've kind of given short shrift to because no one explodes or melts until the very end, is again, those are people who are in their own little movie, and it's a fun little movie. When those two are in the police station together, and he just is like ripping on Nick the entire time, just making fun of him and tearing into him, Don of douchebags and Nick the dick and all the stuff that they say about him, or Nick
Yeah,
the prick, whatever it was.
yeah,
And
something
then he
like
looks at the cop, and the cop is like, "No, we don't put people in witness protection for this.
that.
You're not getting witness protection." And then and then the door guy's tone abruptly changes. Is was
Whole
really funny.
expression. Yeah, it was great. And then we see them again as credits roll. That was just delightful. So fun.
So the door guy, James Lorenz, is one of those. I'm a New York actor doing New York thing. Um, he's in the Irishman as an extra. He's in Bridge of Spies as an extra. Um, but one of the big things that he was involved in, speaking of movies shot in New York that are insane, Frankenhooker.
What?
Yeah, he's one of the major players in Frankenhooker.
Is that a porn? I've
No, it's
never heard of that movie.
okay. So it's another fun body horror movie where a medical student, his fiance gets decapitated in a freak lawnmower accident.
Oh my
So he keeps
gosh.
her head alive, and then he assembles a body for her made out of pieces of hookers that he like lures to a
Oh,
hotel room with super crack. And he's the guy who makes the Frankenhooker.
he is.
Like he's
I
the
have
the lead
never
guy.
seen this movie, but I do remember this cover art on a movie case at our Hollywood Video slash Movie Max slash it changed hands several times, but
Yeah.
our local movie store. That's so funny. And of course, parents were never going to let us rent that one, but That's so funny. All right.
Yeah, and
I don't
he's also really good in that movie. So let's,
add that one to the list. We've not
yeah,
done that one, have we?
no, not at
Oh,
all.
perfect.
I don't think we've done any Frank Lauder movies, and we really should because he's one of those guys, like he's one of those New York dudes that doesn't exist anymore because he's from a New York that doesn't exist anymore. Um,
Mm, I gotcha.
so like we talk about, you know, oh, what's his name? And we talk about when we in a in other reviews we've talked about like weird New York people who just kind of make their own movies, like
Hmm.
the guy who did Q the Winged Serpent and Ray Fessenden. Um, uh, I'm blanking on names, but there was in the 70s and 80s, there was the guy, you could be a director working in New York with like $500,000 and make some insane movies. And New York was an active character in your movie. Larry Cohen is who I'm specifically thinking of. The guy who did Maniac, uh, whose name escapes me. But yeah, like Frank Henenlotter is one of those dudes that you just don't get anymore because he's very specifically a New York guy who makes movies in New York. And
Oh. Would you say that there is, because I wouldn't, New York wasn't really in this movie. The junkyard was kind of its own character. Do you think there's an inanimate character in the movie along those lines in this one?
yes, I feel like the junkyard is a character and kind of the urban decay in the neighborhood around the junkyard in Greenpoint. Like
Mm.
you, the junkyard feels like slightly in better shape than like everything else around it because all you see is like the street, and the street looks awful. You see
Yeah.
a bunch of like burned down, bombed out buildings that are left over from the 70s economic crash in New York, where people were just like, "Well, I
Mhm.
can't pay the taxes on this building. Guess better burn it down." That kind of thing happened a lot. Greenpoint was kind of more of an industrialish area back then, I believe. I could
Yeah.
be wrong. I don't know my New York geography, but it feels like this is the kind of movie that couldn't be made anywhere outside of like that kind of New York, New Jersey, tri-state kind of area, and only in the
Yeah.
specific like super urban. Like if you had done this in Brooklyn or the Bronx or Queens, 100%. If you did this on Staten Island, no. If you did this in like Newark or Hoboken, 100%. You know,
Oh, yeah, Newark for sure.
yeah, because like because like the last time I went to New York, I went to Newark Airport, and I took Uber from the airport to the ferry terminal,
Mhm.
and I took the ferry across into Wall Street Pier. Uh, so I took the ferry rather than paying the same amount for the PATH train. I got to pay like $5 more and got to enjoy
Yeah.
the view of the harbor and seeing the Statue of Liberty and all that stuff. Um, and driving through Newark felt very much like the neighborhood around this movie, uh, specifically the cluttered and gross liquor store.
It does too. It's I don't live anywhere near Newark, which is because when I tell people I live in New Jersey, that's what they assume because Newark is most people's interaction with New Jersey, I feel like. Um, and I'll just let them think that it's fine, but this could have absolutely been filmed in Newark. It could be filmed in Newark now to the same same result, I think.
Yeah, I feel like there's still some pockets of places like this in big cities where
Mhm.
it feels dangerous and weird in a way that like Manhattan doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
Like last time I was in New York,
Philly would be a good spot to film this.
Philly would be a good spot.
Yeah.
Like the
Yep.
Bronx, places like that. You know, for all the talk of like, oh, New York is safe now, there's still some places you don't go, right? And there's
Yeah.
places you don't go in any major city or even minor city. Like there are neighborhoods in my city where I just don't go, right?
Yeah.
And
Every
there,
city's got one,
Mhm.
even the smaller ones. When I lived in Winchester, Virginia, like, that's still, like, very small towny, but there's always and the town I grew up in, there's always the other side of the tracks that you just kinda stay away from.
Yeah, and this movie is very much about the people who are on the other side of the tracks
Mhm.
and who aren't going to get out of there for one reason or another. Wendy is doing like nice things for the kids and giving out food and stuff and kids in quotation marks because I think like Kevin is the same age as her.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
no amount of like goodwill and help are going to get any of these people off the street because they're just on the street. This is how they live now, you know.
Yeah. Yep. But she tries and, you know, makes her feel good, makes them feel good. She's got she's got a good heart, and she seems to kinda like working at the junkyard.
Yeah,
I think
like the first time we see her interacting with the people at the junkyard, she seems to be like giving them a lot of shit and having a good time.
yeah.
I mean, and she doesn't even seem that put out by the attempted molestation that happens later
No.
in the movie.
Well, and again, I think that goes back to we know that, that Frank the Tank is really not a threat. I
Yeah,
mean,
more like Frank the Septic Tank.
yeah. Ew. Somebody call the honey dipper.
Ah, but yeah, it's pretty clear in this movie who's a threat and who's not. And like Bill
Yeah,
the cop is a threat, and Bronson is a threat,
yeah,
and Nick the gangster goons, not Nick the gangster himself, are the threat.
yeah.
So that leads us to sort of the climax of the movie, um, if you will,
Mhm.
where we have the mafia goon, Bill the cop, and Bronson all come together in like a 15-minute kind of running action sequence.
Yeah, where a lot of people die. A lot of people get blown up in this action sequence, I
Oh
feel
yeah,
like.
yeah, and starting with the initial mafia thug who gets basically the crap beaten out of him by Bill, who says, "Hey, look, you can either what's it say,
Die in battle or would you rather die in battle or
die in a
I can't
cage?
remember. Yeah, something like that.
Would you rather be
Rot
in
in
a
a
cage,
cage,
rot in a
something like
cage, or
that.
die in
Yeah.
battle?" And the guy's like, "All right," and they just have a basically a fist fight to the death,
Yeah.
which is pretty crazy.
And then he throws the guy's gun at, uh at the Donna douchebags
Yeah,
and said,
and
"This is what's left of your guy."
yeah, and then that leads in directly into the big action sequence where uh, Bronson and Bill the cop have their fight scene. And what do you think about Bronson's signature weapon, the sharpened femur bone?
It's so weird. I I I I mean, it's very on brand for his character.
I feel like somebody like they heard about like the nexus of ears and things, and we're like, oh, we can do something way crazier than that.
Yeah, femur bone knife, obviously. It's the biggest bone in the human body.
Yeah, that he promptly stabs and then breaks off into the back of that cop,
Mhm.
which was pretty hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah. I love watching this guy's head explode. Um, what what did he blow I'm trying to remember. Jog my memory, if you will. There was something shot a rocket. That's what it was, right? Right
It
at
was
that.
a tank of compressed air, like in Jaws,
Yes, yes, that's what it was. Thank
and it
you.
hits him in the it hits him, and his head explodes.
That was so cool. That
Oh,
might be one of my
100%.
favorites. That might be one of my favorite.
In a movie where you can just throw a dart and just hit a crazy special effects sequence, that was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the headless body looked really good too.
Yeah, it all held together really well.
Mhm.
And man, just they knew what they were doing in that special effects department, and
Yeah, they did.
seeing who all worked in that special effects department and what they've gone on to do, minus Fred, who didn't succeed through no fault of his own, because I think he's a pretty good actor and he's definitely has a way with a prop wiener.
Yeah. That's what so he was the first person I looked at for career stats, and I was surprised to find that he didn't really do much other than this because he's got an it factor. I mean, he looked good on camera, even as a drifter, hobo, whatever terminology they were using. Like I don't know, he looked really good on camera. So I was
He looks good.
surprised.
He's got presence.
Yeah.
He's got
Yeah.
some
He's
charm.
got Riz.
He has Riz, um, and probably other fluids. Um, but yeah, it's weird that he doesn't really. I wonder almost if this is like one of those deals where if somebody gets a role too early in their career and then they get like pigeonholed. It's like, okay, you're just this guy, or like, as the lead of this movie, how do you get the smell of this movie off of you?
Maybe. I don't yeah. I mean, it looks like because yeah, maybe he's still active in other um artistic endeavors, just not film, because it stops, and I guess he was in an art department for something. In 2000 was the most recent thing, but he or 2006. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe acting just wasn't his jam. It's who knows. But he was good though. He was good. And I was surprised to see that he didn't really do anything else, but yeah, what a scene. What an end.
Yeah,
What a
well,
what a
I
big
don't know who
explosive
he.
ending.
I don't know which of these Mike Lackeys I looked up on IMDb might be him, but if he's or on the on Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, on Google. But if he's one of these guys, he has a very profitable career in like law or something else. Because there's a lot of Mike Lackeys that showed up.
Oh.
Uh, if you search for Mike Lackey, and he's and a lot of the jobs that these various Mike Lackeys are doing are like, oh, well, you stopped acting because you got a real job that pays you a lot of money, kind of deal.
Yeah. Yep. And he looks like football coach Mike Lackey.
Yeah, he really does. So maybe he is.
I wonder if that's him. Okay, folks. Well, feel
Did
free
we?
to send us a message.
Yeah, Mike Lackey, if you're out there and somehow you hear about this, give us a shout out, man.
Looks like you're a football coach now and doing real well. So good job.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
awesome.
I mean,
You just never know
maybe
where
he
life will take you.
choreographed the penis football scene, and that's
Oh my gosh.
was his
Maybe.
background, and that led him to his career in coaching.
That would be so funny. What if that started it? What if he was like, wow, I had so much fun playing football. I think I'm just going to coach now. Let me go coach for ESU.
That
Amazing.
would be really funny, but if it's him, man, you did a good job. You nailed your one movie role, and then you got to go on to have a very cool career doing other things. So good for you,
Yep.
man.
Totes. Good for you. Well, I think on that note, we've discussed pretty much everything there is to discuss for now anyway about this movie. I think it's time for final thoughts. Popcorn ratings. Ron, would you like to kick us off with the popcorn ratings?
I will kick the popcorn ratings like I'm punting a penis football.
Yes. Do
Man,
it.
I gotta
Which
tell
one
you.
though?
Oh, obviously the Packer, because I feel
Okay.
like the other ones would just like bounce off in a weird direction because they don't have enough weight to them.
The
Um,
Packer.
yeah, but it's okay. So this movie is very strange, and it is not for everyone. I've seen it multiple times, and I still don't 100% know if I like it or not. And you know, I know Lindsay's talked that she's been pretty confused about how she feels about the whole thing too. And that makes total sense because this is a movie that seems designed just to confuse the shit out of everyone. It's a black comedy in the blackest of ways. It's a horror movie. It's a splatter movie. It's a noteworthy special effects extravaganza where they spent no money on anything else because they were shooting in a friend's junkyard. Um, if you told me some of these people in the movie were legit homeless people, I would believe you wholeheartedly. But at the same time, there's always something interesting happening pretty much throughout the entire movie. The the places they choose to shoot look weird and interesting. The people they're shooting, the actors are weird and interesting. Everybody's doing some kind of business. Everybody's got a thing. Everybody's giving 110%, like behind the camera and in front of the camera. And I have to admire a movie that's like, you know what? We've got $100,000 and we spent 75 of that making various people melt, explode, or turn into weird viscous oozes and slimes. And it's a really strange movie to give a large popcorn to, but I'm going to give it a large popcorn. I've seen it multiple times, and it remains compulsively watchable and interesting. And you will catch new things every time you watch it. Specifically, if you look really close at the various scenes of people melting, you will catch new shades of ooze or new goops or just new things you didn't notice before, like the fact that as the guy's melting on the fire escape, the cat just kind of stares at him the entire time as he's like turning into a vomit monster, and then the cat just kind of wanders away, which
In
is
classic
100%,
cat fashion.
100% a cat. Yeah. So yeah, large popcorn. If you haven't seen this movie and you have a high tolerance for slime glapola monsters and necrophilia jokes, then I recommend checking it out. What about you, Lindsay?
I am still confused about how I feel about this movie, but one of my favorite reviews for it that I stumbled upon said, "It's awful, but I had fun." And I think that that is really the perfect way to describe it. Like, nothing there are so many things about this movie that I feel like I shouldn't like, but I really liked it in the context of the movie. It was and I loved all of the body horror, all of the practical effects, the makeup, I'm with you, Ron. If someone had come up to me and said, "Yeah, we just hired a bunch of homeless people to be in this film and, gave them each $1,000," then I'd be like, "Oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense. That's super believable." But I think I went into this movie thinking that I wasn't going to like it, or I had the bar set really low, and then I ended up really liking it. so much more than I thought. I'm not sure if I like it more than Troll 2, mainly because Troll 2 has the nostalgia effect for me. I really, really do like it, but that's the one that I ended up comparing this one to the most, as anyone who's made it this far into this episode has learned. I think I think I think I'm gonna give it a large popcorn too. I'll stick with that. I give it a go. Anyone who wants to try, like if you can make it through the first, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of the movie, then I think you're good till the end. It's a solid, I don't know. It's just a really fun movie, and I'm still even talking about it now. I'm going to be thinking about it for a while. So for me, if a movie makes me think about it way after I've watched it, I think that warrants a large popcorn because it's clearly making my feelings and my brain work a lot more than expected in a good way, in this sense, in a good way in this case. So yeah, we both gave it a large popcorn.
Would you encase the popcorn in any sort of slime or ooze?
Oh, for sure. Do you remember green ketchup?
I do remember green ketchup and purple ketchup.
Something like that, maybe.
So
Or
large
like,
popcorn with a hot dog on the side with purple ketchup.
well, if we're adding a hot dog, I'd go with a medium popcorn and a hot dog on the side. But yeah, but definitely, yeah, maybe that's what I'll rate this movie. Ron, I'm gonna rate this movie a hot dog with green ketchup.
Well,
That's my rating. A severed hot dog with green ketchup. It's perfect. It's the perfect rating.
so not only did I blow up the rating scale on Tis the Podcast, I've also now managed to blow up the rating scale on my own podcast. That's just great.
This is on you, Ron. This is your fault. Well, on that note, everyone, you can find and follow us on social media at FilmStripPod. We share announcements about upcoming shows as well as other fun content. And don't forget to subscribe and share the show. Bonus points if you leave us a positive review. It helps other people find our podcast, and it makes us feel really good about ourselves. Until next time, thanks for listening to Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.